Robyn, how you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I just had a quick question, a burning question, really. The name of your Instagram, is that from the movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Well, it's from my podcast, Honey, I'm homeschooling the kids, but
Oh,
probably some of maybe the inspiration came from that. I'm not sure.
oh, okay. Yeah, I just totally, remember that movie from when I was a child. So I was like, oh, wait a second. I remember this
I
movie.
loved that movie when I was a kid. So
Yeah, with Rick Moranis.
yeah, with Rick Moran.
Yeah,
And my kids
awesome.
too. So
Yes, it's a classic.
it really is a classic.
Awesome. Yeah. So we're on today, and title of our podcast today is Homeschooling Adventures with Robyn. So if you could just introduce yourself, and then we'll just dive right into some really cool questions. I can't wait to get to them. So go ahead.
Thanks, Rob. So my name's Robyn Robertson. I am a home educating parent. We actually, I say we do natural learning or unschooling. My kids, I have two kids. They are 15 and 13, and we've been home educating for over 9 years now. So I'm also the creator and host of the podcast, Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids. And the biggest thing about the podcast and the community as it's grown is I, as a home educating parent, I knew what it was like, the questions, the fears, the doubts, the uncertainties, and the learning journey, like the continuous process that it is. And the podcast is a platform to answer those questions that I had, and I know others have had or have, as well as, engage the community and build a stronger community around my own family as well, and for others too. So, and to spread the word and inspiring stories about the many, many, many families around the world that are choosing this type of learning path. So that's me. I live in Northern Alberta. We've lived in many places, and that's how we started homeschooling, is through world schooling, because we wanted to travel with our kids. And it's just been a journey that we take every year, because it's always changing, always learning. The biggest person that's learning the most is me through all of it. So that's kind of it in a short nutshell for you.
Okay, wow. So it sounds like you've been doing this for a bit of time. So this is definitely pre-pandemic then, it sounds like.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I noticed a recent trend with, the pandemic, like just a lot of people are just like, you know what, I never met a happy parent during that time. And I understood completely, being online learning it wasn't the best, to be honest. It was, how should I say this? It was a great effort, but there was just a lot of things that, that weren't quite worked out and everything. But that's beside the point. So I was just curious, Robyn, so in those at the beginning of the 9 years, what made you start homeschooling yourself? Or, you mentioned travel, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We wanted to travel with our kids, and honestly, we just chose homeschooling because it allowed us to be flexible and to create our own schedule, and we could travel. We couldn't really do that if we were stuck in a classroom or have that flexibility to do that. So we decided to homeschool our kids so that we could travel and be on the move, and create every day as we wanted to create it. And so really that's the beginning of it. We didn't expect to be doing it this long. So that was a nice surprise as well. But that's how we began, is through travel.
Okay. If I could ask, because I know a lot of my audience is very curious about, so what kind of job are you all doing if you're, able to travel, right? Like, do you mind sharing that a little bit?
I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
So at that time, what we did is we actually rented out our home. So we had renters for our home. So that helped. And my husband was transitioning to a new business. For quite a long time, he was a writer, a ghostwriter. And so he could be mobile with this business as long as he had his laptop and Wi-Fi. And if clients were willing to meet with him either online or fly to wherever we were in person, usually that was a good perk for a lot of the clients. So that's what we did. And I ended up taking a leave of absence from my job, from my work. I actually worked at the school that my kids attended. And again, I thought I would be returning within like 6 months or so. Obviously I didn't. But when we first started out, that's the jobs that we did. So we were able to be mobile and flexible, but also the surprising thing is when you're traveling, depending on where you are, of course, depending on the countries, it can actually be quite cost efficient, especially if you've taken care of things at your home base, whether I know some families that sell or rent. And so things like that are taken care of. We actually find that we spend less money. And so, you don't actually need as much as you think when you're traveling.
Absolutely, yeah. I travel a bit myself. I'm just curious. So, what was your favorite country that you traveled to?
I never can answer that question.
Oh, okay.
Every place is so different and has its own unique things about it. That's the beauty of the world, right? My husband and I traveled a lot on our own together and individually before we had kids. And with my kids, we lived in Jamaica, we lived in South Korea, Canada, of course. We've traveled to Australia as well. And each place was great. Each place was very different, but each place was wonderful. So.
Okay, so it sounds like traveling for you and your spouse as well was a very big value for you all. So with that, what has been the most valuable lesson from this 9-year journey of homeschooling, traveling, and whatnot?
The most valuable lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most valuable lessons is that life isn't necessarily just black and white. We think that it's I think we take comfort in feeling like if we do things one way, everything is going to be okay, that all our problems will be solved, the path will be laid out. I think the biggest learning is that there's always nuances. There's always specific or different realities to every person, family. There's different individual personalities that make us us. So I think the biggest thing is just to be open to the many changes and the differences that each of us have and that the world has as well. And that it's just things are not always exactly as we think that they seem or should be or appear to be, and that it's actually okay to try new things and to question things and to do things differently, because that's usually when we learn the most about the world around us and about ourselves as well.
So learning to you sounds like it's not just something static. That's not just in textbooks. So when have you felt like your children have learned the most, right? Like when do you feel like they're the most engaged and they're just like, I want to learn? Because obviously it's not found perhaps in the normal conventional ways.
Mm-hmm. Doing everyday life, experiencing things, creating things. They learn the most when they're engaged in something they're interested in and that they're driving. So if it's something that they're creating, if it's a passion that they have, it's something that they're creating around that they're working on or being a part of, that's when I find that they've learned the most. And when they're really driving their own learning and having their own choice in that as well.
So, as you mentioned before, you're traveling, your kids are, let's say, engaged in a particular topic, and it sounds like maybe it's project-based learning then a little bit, or because I'm just asking so the audience and I can have a kind of a concrete example of like, okay, your kids are interested in a subject, but you're traveling, so how does that all work out? Is there a specific example that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I can give you an example from, right now we haven't really been traveling, obviously, for a while. So I can give you an example from previous when they were younger and now as they're older, especially as self-directed learners. So probably one example would be, when we were traveling and, one of my kids is really into animals and nature. And instead of taking out a book and trying to find questions and answers and things like that for them to do or for him to do, we tried to find experiences. So, we lived in Jamaica for a little while, and it was going to the beach, and he was asking about all the kinds of fish that there are and what kinds they are, and then researching and finding out, what's the names of the fish? Are they always there at that time of year? We went at a different time. Maybe we went at dusk, or we went in the evening instead of in the morning, and different fish appear. Why do these ones come out now? Why are the other ones not present at this time of day? What's the differences between that? It's taking something that the questions they're asking or interested in and not shutting it down, but continuing to help them find the answers and explore more and find out through a setting that is natural, that they're experiencing, that their curiosity can be alive in. And then as they get older, that's really translated into, especially since I have teenagers now, being able to actually do things within their interests. So for example, my oldest, who's always been really into animals and nature, he works actually for a wildlife outfitters. And it's something he was able to begin last year. This is his second season. And he's living that. He's in, they are scouting, they are guiding. He has to know the environment, the animals, the species, the weather, where they live, the habitat, all of those intricacies, those things that he asked about as a child now has built and grown and become something that he's able to do and really live and experience as well. So I think that's, probably one of the examples of the ways that we did that, following the interest and finding ways that, we've lived in the city. Used to live in Seoul, for example. It's not as easy to find nature around the mega city of Seoul as it is in maybe Canada or Jamaica or other places. But then we just tried to find other ways that they can experience what they were interested in. My daughter loves art. And so, when we were in the city, we tried to find things like museums that were had artist exhibits, and immersed ourselves in that world as much as we could. Being in Seoul, the wonderful thing is they did have access to, there was a fantastic Matisse exhibit while we lived there. And so we went and visited that exhibition, and then learned all we could about the artist, and, did our own art and explored and try and saw what was around the city that was reflective of that as well. It's really just being engaged in that every single day and experiencing that as a daily life as well. So.
Yes.
Is that specific enough example?
No, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. Because I love how in the story that you shared, you tell how kids are naturally curious and they want to learn, right? And I love how you just really just brought them into the experiential learning, right? It's not just textbooks, YouTube videos, which is fine. That's all that you have available. But when you can go to a zoo, you can go hiking, you can go, like you said, you just said, hey, what's around us? Let's go to the beach, right? And your kids ask questions. And I love how you didn't shut down the questions. You just said, oh, let's find out together. Let's Google it. Maybe we can ask the local people, right? Maybe go to the fish market, and ask the fishermen those questions, right? And that's actual learning. Get on the boat, go out for a ride with them, and really learn about the animals that live around the coast, right? That's such an in-depth, rich experience, and how that led to.
We did, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it led to your child being now really interested in, studying further, and I think that's great, because that's just awesome. That's a really great example, and I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. So what surprised you about homeschooling? Because if I understand correctly, you had put them in formal school in Canada, right, for a little bit before you decided, all right, let's try out this traveling homeschooling thing. So having both experiences, what really surprised you the most about homeschooling compared to, just a conventional, traditional schooling?
Oh, there were so many things. I think what surprised me is that I immediately thought that it was just going to be like the classroom. So I did my best to replicate what was happening in the classroom in our homeschooling. And what surprised me was that it was nothing like that at all. There's so many differences with that, right? You have just your children who you are with all the time. You get to see, you wake up and you see their moods, their emotions. They can share things with you when they're feeling safe and, safe enough to learn in that way. You get to be part of all of those little details that I think get missed because it's just hard to do in a classroom with a large class or with many kids. If you're a teacher that has many different classes, that relationship, I think, is the biggest thing that surprised me, that it's not about the academics, actually. That is not the first primary thing. It's about building the relationship. relationship with your kids and with yourself, and understanding learning in that way. And that was my biggest surprise. And then all of those other things that fall into it, like in the classroom, the scheduling, the curriculum, the set hours of the day, none of that applies in homeschooling. It's so different. The exploration, the things that you can do as well. It was, all of those things are very, very different. And that was my big surprise. But the biggest was that it came down to relationships. And, I recently had on my podcast an episode where we really talked about with a guest, the science of feeling safe. And I really connected with that because I think that was the biggest part of my learning journey, is that idea that you learn when you feel safe and when you feel respected and trusted and understood as well. That's when the learning really truly happens, and it really, really sticks as well. And I think that's what I really truly have started to understand through homeschooling.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like to me is there's a relationship, right, of the aspect of learning, right? That may be missing perhaps for some students who are in public school. Especially, the reality of public school is that, I have 40 kids a class, and if you have an hour with them, I mean, you do the math, it's not a lot of time, personal attention with each kid, and I do my best, but definitely there's days where it's like, oh, this kid's hasn't been in my class in a while. What happened? Yeah. And I definitely understand that, that the best part is the relational aspect, right, of understanding your kids and not just knowing, oh, this is how they learn. That's a very small aspect, it sounds like, right, of this whole homeschooling journey for you, is that education is so much more about the person.
Yeah. Absolutely. And think if you have a child, for example, who hasn't been in class for a couple of days, and then they come back and they maybe seem disoriented, or they don't seem the same, or they seem withdrawn, you could ask them, like, absolutely, how are you doing? What's happening? What's going on? Do you want to talk to anybody? But there's also certain lines and boundaries as an educator that you have. There's also, how much are they willing to share and to open up and to feel safe to do so as well? And then how much are they going to withhold, and therefore also withhold themselves too? So, there may be many other things that have been going on in their life that you're not privy to, but that really do affect their bottom line of their emotional well-being, their social well-being, their physical well-being, and therefore that absolutely affects their learning and what's going on in their mind and their body as well.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I actually did something very different this year where I handled a survey to my students. And the first question was, do you trust me? And the second question was like, do you feel safe in the classroom? And I told the kids, you don't have to write your name down. This is not count for any points. I'm going to give you candy if you just finish the questions and you answer like truthfully. Good old bribing the kids. And the answer.
So did they feel safe? Like, that's always
most of them. Yes.
And how and when and why? Like, what helps you to feel safe in the class?
So the first question was very interesting because I think I really got to know some of the kids. If they wrote their name down, right, I understood like their thinking, right? Some of the kids just wrote something like, yeah, it's not you. I just don't trust anyone. I'm like, oh, okay, right? And so that's how they interpret the question, right? Yeah. Some of them were like, yeah, I can't really say because I haven't really talked to you a lot. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's a fair point. And some kids were like, yeah, of course, like, of course I trust you, like you're the adult. I'm like, okay, right? Yeah, like it's how they interpret the question that was most interesting to me. And most of them were like, yeah, of course, you're a great teacher, you keep the classroom safe. I feel like every time I ask, if I ask a question, you try to be your best to respond to it. So that's kind of how they judge that question, basically, to answer it. The safety one, yeah, it was all over the place too. I have students who just moved from other schools, and so they're very defensive and guarded. Yeah. And so they're like, yeah, it's not you. I got here. I don't know anyone. I'm like, okay, and most of the kids are like, yeah, they just say, you know what? Nothing bad's happened in the classroom to me, so I guess I'm safe. I was like, okay, that's good to know. you know? And so it was very eye-opening to just see their responses, you know, and just the variety of like, wow, I did not think I could interpret that question that way, but that's very interesting. So yeah, that was really a fun experience for me. So the next question, we kind of already touched upon it a little bit, but so in your experience, does how one parent, excuse me, directly affect how they homeschool? So an example of that would be, say, you know, as a parent, you're very, or even just your parent's personality is very structured, right? So does that kind of naturally flow into how they homeschool their children?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think even beyond that, because for example, I think I am a person who likes organization and I'm like not highly structured, but at the same time, that's just me. But also, I recognize that that's not necessarily how my kids want or do things as well. So parenting, I think more on the power level, the authority level, on the trust level. I think of it more as it absolutely affects homeschooling, but in the idea of, do you parent in a way that you're the absolute top authority that knows everything and is always right, and your children are down here? That actually will shift how your homeschooling is structured as well. Or are you a parent who believes in gentle parenting and connection and communication, and it being more of a flow in that way? That absolutely, the way that you parent that way is going to affect your homeschooling. Most likely it'll look more like that as well. And the other part of it too is it comes down with parenting, it comes down to trust. I think so much. And I think that's a big part of the home educating journey. And when it flourishes a lot more is when you're able to build trust in your children and show and demonstrate that you trust them, and that therefore they can trust you, and also you trust yourself as a parent. Because, you know, and that translates into your parenting as well, because I think what happens is the less trust you have, the more you want to control. And especially I think for us, for example, where our family are big on building independence and self-directed learning, and that idea that the better you understand yourself, the choices that you make for yourself will be better as well. And the more safe and trusted you feel, the more willing you are to try things and to make mistakes as well. And I think that really is a reflection of parenting too, that trickles down, or is part of how you create your home learning environment.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I've always understood that, you know, the way. So I've been on a, you know, parenting journey myself. I now have a 1 year almost, and you know, I've seen the transformation where, you know, when I first found out that my wife was pregnant, I was like, oh my gosh, I do not want to F this child up, right? That was my mentality, and going through a journey of like, now I can safely say, I get to be the parent I always wanted in my life, right? And it's not judging my parents or anything, but understanding, like, true forgiveness is understanding, you know, your parents, like, they did the best they could with the resources they believe they had available to them.
Yes.
Right. So that's all the flaws, all the things, you know, whatever insecurities my parents had, like, they projected that right onto like us. Right. And I feel like in homeschooling that is magnified a million times because of the amount of time you're spending with your children. You know, before in public school, you might see them a couple hours a day, maybe, you know, the weekends, summer. But in homeschooling, you wake up, you're with them. And so so like if parents aren't consciously aware of like, okay, why is it that when my kids are going out of control, like quote unquote, whatever that is to the parent, right? Why do I feel something arise and I need to feel like I need to take control of the situation right now? Like I just have to, right? And if they don't, you know, aren't even aware of that or answer those questions themselves, you know, that's like it's like the cycle of like, okay, you're just trying to control them, like you said, the authoritarian model of like, I'm right, you're the child, you got to listen to me, which sometimes it's true, like, you know, in a safety issue, right? I don't want my little 1-year-old running across the street like, no, you're coming back here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
we have that experience and understanding that depending on the developmental level, they might not be there yet. I do think it's also important to remember as well that we're always going to make mistakes, no matter how, you know, what we want to do the best we're trying to do, you know, there are going to be things that our kids are probably going to most likely be upset with us for. I think that's just a matter of human nature and the way that we grow and explore. But at the same time, we do get that wonderful chance, because also, like you said, being consciously aware that we're present so much with them when we're home educating, to know and to demonstrate that, hey, you know, and communicate that I don't have all the answers. I don't know the answer to everything. I'm not right all the time. I'm learning as well, just like you are. And it's okay to let me know when, you know, things aren't going okay, or when I'm not doing things like, or you need something that I'm not providing, or that, you know, maybe something is missing, or you're getting a lot of and you're really happy with as well. And that part of this journey is also understanding ourselves as a family and as a parent and as a child, so that we can work through these things together and make it better. It won't always be perfect, and I think that's something to always remember. I think sometimes many times with homeschooling, we try and do all the things that our parents didn't, and that absolutely that will show up in our homeschooling, but also to remember that there's going to be things that we are going to miss, that we're not going to see, that, you know, that we're not going to get possibly, that will change as our world changes and that our kids change and need. But at the same time, that I hope that they have the understanding that we're trying the best that we can, and that we love and support them no matter what. And hopefully by demonstrating that and showing that, they can do the same for us in return as well. So then again, that goes into how do we model our relationships with our own parents in front of our own kids as well? How do we communicate with them, with ourselves, to them? All of that is part of that life personal learning process that I think, you know, when it comes down to that parenting level and that level of, you know, we're trying to do good things, but there's going to be mistakes that happen, but mistakes are okay. That's how we get better. And when we can communicate all of that, when we can be open about that, then we can try our best to change and to get better. If we don't, and we're trying to hold on or control or upset, you know, all of those things, then it just makes it harder to create a better change in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just relearned this recently from one of my coaches. He said, you know, if you're frustrated, that's a good thing, because that means your neurons are expanding. Your mind is growing, right? Because you were at this level, or you had this mindset or belief about something, and when you're encountering something that's like conflicting with it, now your brain's like, oh my gosh, you know, what's going on? I feel frustrated, but that's okay. That just means your neurons are growing. They're firing in new ways. And I think a lot of times it comes down to, how do the parents feel in the unknown? You know, if you were raised in the public school and you have this image in your head of, this is what education should look like. Yeah. And so I'm naturally going to transfer that, right, to my homeschooling, right, and copy everything the same at first. And then, you know, along at some point, if they're aware, they're like, you know, this may not be working actually. Right? And it's that awareness of like, okay, so what now? I have to break away from that image I had of education, right? And like for a lot of parents, that's very uncomfortable. And so they exude that energy like, oh man, I don't know what I'm doing. Like what you said about like in Jamaica going to the marketplace, I understand that as learning now, right? But I think before, especially the beginning of my education career, I'd be like, that does not sound like education at all. Yeah. And I think some parents would say the same thing, like, that is not education. Where's the book report? Right. Where's the
Yeah, how do you know they're if they're
exactly
not it down or doing a report on it?
Exactly. Where's the notebook?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, Rock. It's like, well, we call it the deschooling process, right? That you have to remove yourself from those ideas that learning looks a certain way, which is usually the school way. Then that actually there's so many other ways that we can learn, and so many other parts of life that still give us all of those aspects of learning. And then what's also really important, do they have to learn their multiplication tables at this specific age? Do they have to learn them can they just deeply understand them without having to like say the answers out to you? What if they really understand the concept, but maybe they have to count it out before they give you the answer? Is that really wrong? What if they use it all the time in their daily life? They run a business, they're going shopping for their parents, they're demonstrating it, but they don't write it down on paper and show it to you. Like, is that not still math? Or, any of the other ideas, what is success? If you're a success in homeschoolers, does it look like, do they still get their high school diploma and certain marks? Is that success? Or do they go to a certain university? What if they don't go to university or college at all? Then is it a failure? We have these ideas of what learning and then successful learning looks like, but so often it's only this one idea in one way. When we actually have people in our world that are absolutely successful, but it's not in those points that we think that has to be or should be or school should be, but they're happy, they're joyful, they're contributing to society, they are caring for themselves, their community, and their family. They're doing all of those things as a wonderful human being or citizen or family member, but maybe they didn't go to school at all. Maybe they never wrote a math exam. Maybe they never wrote an essay. Maybe they didn't go to college or university. Maybe they only own their own business, or they are doing something else that doesn't look traditional, but yet, they, on so many other levels, they're absolutely extremely successful. I think that's the other part of the deschooling process is, what does success mean to you? And why are you possibly so stuck on holding on to that idea of success, that it has to look a certain way? And, why is that, thing? Where did that come from? Why, and if it doesn't play out that way, is it wrong? Is it? How different can it look, right? So, and that will be different for everyone, from our own experiences, our own parenting, the way we grew up. Those ideas definitely shape us, but, they also don't always apply as the world changes and we change, we get older, and especially as the world around us looks different as well, so.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad you actually brought the math example. I remember when I was going through teacher training program, we watched this video, and it was one of the most profound, impactful videos to me, because it really helped change how I was teaching. In the video, the researchers went to Brazil, and they were studying how kids did math, right? And there's these kids who didn't really show up to school, but their mental math was amazing. Right. And the reason they're failing was because they were not doing the way that the teacher wanted them to do. Yeah. Right. These kids would be on the streets selling stuff. And I guess the bills, the currency in Brazil is a much higher value than ours. Yeah. So there's a huge, they have all big numbers, thousands of dollars. Yeah. Equal to something.
They've had crazy inflation over their history.
Yeah, exactly. So the kids are used to calculating in their head their own way, and they're very fast. You ask them 25 times 3,750. Boom, they got it for you. I'm right? But then they can't show the teacher the way that the teacher wanted them to at school. So they were failing, but they were getting the right answers within 5 seconds of you telling them the numbers. They're just yeah, we got it, because we do that all the time on the streets. We're selling stuff. Yeah, and it's just that's learning to me. I'm yeah, they got the answer. They just didn't get it the way, right, that the teacher wanted to show your work and all that stuff. And I was so glad that I saw that video at the beginning of my education career, because that really started me, deschooling myself, basically. I cannot teach the students I had the same way I was taught. I just can't. Yeah. It doesn't work. So I had to throw it out and step into the unknown of okay, so if I do it that way, what else is there? Mm-hmm. Right. And that was the beginning of, of why I'm here, and I support homeschooling. And yeah, I still love what I do. Don't get me wrong. I love teaching STEM because of what you said. It's it's student led. Often by the end of the class, the students know more than I do. They know how to code it better. They know how to change their grades actually on the website. They're oh yeah, I can change it temporarily. I'm yeah, but you just hit refresh button and you're good. It goes back. But that's example of learning, right? I'm I kind of chuckle. I'm clever.
Yeah.
Because of what you learn.
It's real, and they're applying it. And
they're applying what they're learning in coding a website. They're I can read the code for a website and figure out what to change my grade. I'm oh, very clever.
That is awesome. Like
Yeah.
they get it. So I think that's,
Yeah.
I think sometimes that's missed. And I also get that, you know, within the school institution, it's so much about the data, because then you have such big numbers that you have to be accountable to everyone, you know, to administrators or to the board or to the government, to the voters, all this sort of stuff. So the easiest way to do that is to say, okay, here's the numbers that show we're doing our job. But the thing that gets hard sometimes is that there's so many other things going on between those numbers that are missed, that maybe it, you know, maybe a student isn't able to replicate a formula on paper, but they truly understand it, but they're not going to get a number or grade because they're not showing steps 1 to 10, although they can go question straight to the answer, right? So I think I remember there was a student, for example, in the school that my kids worked in, that my kids went to and I worked in, and there was a exceptionally bright student, and he was neurodiverse. And the big concern with the teachers is that his final exam, he knew he could, like, it was the grade 12 math exam, a big, where I live, it was weighted a lot. It's a province wide.
Okay.
There was no problems with him doing any of the answers. He would look at the question and write the answers, and can do that exam in half the time. The thing was, he did it all in his head. He couldn't write out those steps. So their concern wasn't that he didn't understand it. They knew very well that he was a higher math level than all the teachers in that school. But he wasn't going to get the marks because he couldn't show his work. Because he was like, I have it all in my head. I don't know how to put it all on paper. But at the same time, he absolutely, he understood it better than anyone else, probably better than anyone that wrote that exam. But yet he wasn't going to pass because he wasn't doing it in that way that they exactly wanted. And I think that's sad. You know, that's really unfortunate. Brilliant. But if you just looked at his grade, you would assume that he wasn't. And, you know, I think that's part of, like, we were talking about looking at learning a different way and deschooling. It's, you know, looking at all those ways and examples that we sometimes miss by thinking it has to be one way. And also giving yourself a little bit of space and your kids a little bit of space and, like, and grace and openness in that way that, okay, you know, it's maybe things for you don't look this way right now, maybe it might later, or maybe it might never at all, but that doesn't mean that you're any less, or you don't know any less, or you might not come to that understanding. It's, you know, just being patient and being and having trust as well that it will happen too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes you plant the seed and you just don't know when or how it's going to grow. Actually, you have no control.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You have no control over that. Sure. You can control when you plant it, right? When you dig the ground, you bury it. Sure. You can control when you water it, but the growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sun might not come out this summer.
Yeah.
Too much rain. You know, you might have perfect weather conditions. You know, you can't control any of that. Absolutely. There might be a drought and you can't water your garden, you know, or, you know, exactly. There's so many factors that we can try our best to try and control as much as we can. But usually the one thing that we should know is that we can't always control everything. We can't control everything.
No, that control is an illusion, basically.
The uncertainty that you talked about, right?
Yeah.
And the uncertainty.
I think as a parent, you have to be, especially for, you know, first-time parents like myself. You know, I'd be comfortable with, I have no idea how to handle these things when they pop up, because that's the first time I'm ever encountering it, right? I can read all the books I want about parenting. I can get all the really good advice from people who have had, you know, multiple kids and are very wise that I trust. But when push comes to shove and my child is reacting to something, I'm like, oh, that's new.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to move through it with my child, right? Yeah. And that's just a journey, you know. And speaking of, so what is something you've had to let go of to homeschool effectively, you feel like, through this your journey?
Having to be right, having to feel like I know all the answers, and what other people think of me as a mother and a parent. I think those are the big things, and because then I could let my kids just be themselves. I think so much of it is we we handle things within our family or within our home education journey based on what others think. And I think that can be the biggest detriment as well. Just we talk about we want our kids to be themselves and make mistakes and feel free and safe to be themselves. But at the same time, if we're like, yeah, you can do that, but make sure that, you know, you wear these clothes when we go out, or you don't dress like, or you don't talk like this, or, you know, you do these certain things when these people are over, or you still make sure that this is done by the end of the day. Make sure that, you know, this worksheet is completed by the end of the week, or, you know, certain things that so many times it adds up to what others are, you know, we're worried about what others are going to look in and see it and judge, not necessarily what's important for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think deep down, humans have this innate fear of like being cut off from their tribe, so to speak, right? Whatever that tribe is, it could be, you know, your parents' approval, could be your friends. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even your co-op. Let's say you're in a co-op for homeschooling, like the other parents, what they look at you and go, interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Our sense of our belonging, right? We need to, our survival is on our belonging and our connection in our community, for sure. So our natural instinct is to do our best to preserve that and make it safe and to stay within that, for sure.
Yeah, I gotta stay with the herd, right? Yeah. So to speak. Yeah. And you know, that's not to say that it's not to say that other people's thoughts aren't important, right? I think it's very immature to say, you know what, screw you all. I think that mentality is very immature in a way, because you have to take what they say without taking it on.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Without taking it totally, personally, like it's about you and therefore you're wrong in that way. There's always, you know, that's even when there's things like naysayers for homeschooling or people that don't agree with what you're doing. There's always a chance to learn from them as well too, right? They might have a point that you haven't looked at before, and therefore it might help you in your home education journey, or it might give you a chance to look into them and how their own fears and doubts and their own experiences. Maybe they've experienced something personally when they're younger that, you know, we don't know about yet, or that they're still processing, but might give us better insight into them and therefore help us in our journey as well. So yeah,
absolutely. It's like I said, it's just about, you know, what other people say and how you're interpreting it, and the maybe guilt and shame you feel. And now you feel like I got to be defensive. I got to defend myself, you know, because I don't want this thought to take hold of me, right? And cause and trigger me, right? So we lash out, whatever that looks like. But it really comes down to you taking what they say without actually taking it on yourself personally. Yeah, like you just can't take it personally. It's like, all right, I wonder why they said that. They said that. You know, is there something really? Perhaps I can look at myself or how I'm parenting, or maybe even this idea of like homeschooling that maybe I really am missing. Like maybe the kids are missing something that I'm completely just oblivious to. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Let's see here. So what's something that you feel like is missing from homeschooling that you wish you had perhaps more of?
Well, I think this probably is a more personal thing. It's nice now, the last couple of years, what's happened is a lot of the access that we've had, like to community and being out and around, just because of COVID, we haven't had access to. And I think that's an important part of homeschooling. There's that idea again that homeschoolers don't get to do much and they're not socialized, but usually there's a lot of community and things happening, but we haven't been able to do very much recently. And so that's something that I missed for sure. Otherwise, you know, when things are in normality, or whatever you want to call it, or going back to normality now, some of the things that I think I miss or I wish that was there would be an openness to homeschoolers. And I mean that because now it's great because there's more understanding, but I often find there's misunderstanding with the homeschooling community. There's a bit of judgment. And so what happens sometimes is there's so many opportunities within the community that they can be welcomed in and accepted and be a great fundamental part of the community, when sometimes they're not. There's many opportunities to do that where sometimes the idea of homeschoolers keeps them out. So, I think just acceptance that this is another way to learn and do things as well. But I think, as long as we still share our stories and what we're doing and help to normalize it in many ways, that will help that part of it. Otherwise, I think that's different for every community. Every community and place that you live is going to have things that are wonderful and things that, that you're missing. Living in a rural area, which is where I live, access to things might be a bit different than when we lived in the city, for example. Experiences that we would have in the city, we won't get out here, but vice versa. Like right now, I had a big deer eating my garden as we're on this Instagram live, for example. Maybe, and who knows what else is out there, but different experiences, that we would have in every day that you might not have in other places too. So I think that's really depends on the individual family too.
Yeah, I think you touch upon a great point for everyone out there who is homeschooling, is the fact of, yes, there's more acceptance, I think, for homeschooling, but not to a level where, a common thing I've heard a lot from people is like, oh, I wish my kids can do sports, because a lot of sports, right, especially for children, is based on public school. You're part of a school team, right? And while there are alternatives, like, there's traveling teams in America where the parents pay a lot of money and they're very involved with, like, these kids are traveling to different places to play.
Club teams in
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I figured it's something similar, but I feel like a lot of times they miss out on these things, or even just something like, there's days for students, right? And oftentimes I feel like some places are like, you're a homeschooler, so how do you prove that? Like, where's your ID? Where's your ID to show that, you get a discount at the museum? I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, it's a real thing. Like, hey, come on now. Like, just because we're not part of, what's been set up doesn't mean that we're not, we're not students still, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. So, so as you know, the title of my podcast is called "The Heart of Education," right? So something interesting about the word education. I actually looked at the root meaning just because I got curious. So education, if you look at the word educo, I can't remember the other word, how to pronounce it, but basically the essence of the meaning is to draw from within. Mm-hmm. So education, right? The word means the root word from the Latin root is to draw from within yourself, is how I see it. So knowing that, what does the heart of education, mean to you? What does it look like, smell like, even taste like, feel like? After, in your experience and journey.
Yeah, and understanding that it's to draw from within. I think the heart of it is, you hear the term a lifelong learner. It's really understanding that, learning is very intrinsic, like it belongs to you. And when you're thinking about within, with the education, of the idea of the real meaning of education, that it's lifelong, that if we are able to support learners to understand that they can still learn without having a teacher standing beside them, without being in a certain place, no matter how old they are and where they are, there's a process that's continuing. And if they understand how to learn for themselves, that the real true education is continuous, and that you can continue to be educated and well educated by being open and curious, asking questions in the way that you need to ask questions, and finding out the information and the learning that you need to for those things as well. And that it doesn't stop when you graduate. It doesn't stop when the school bell rings. It doesn't start or stop at a certain time, that it's lifelong, and that everyone is able to do that and have access to that as well. I think the wonderful thing is the internet now has really changed the game in that. And connecting communities around the world and learning from each other. But I think accessibility to learning, it goes beyond just being able to go to a classroom. Accessibility should be open to everyone in many different forms and many different ways, whether that is support in the community, access to internships and experiences and jobs, at libraries, teachers and educators within certain areas, and niches to help others, to help learners. It looks it's so broad. There's many different ways it can happen, but I think in order to support learners and education, I think that is a whole community effort that we definitely can do and should encourage. But it's definitely an internal individual process that I think we can help learners to understand. As long as I know how to learn and understand that this is lifelong, then yeah, I can do this, and that they can do that. That's the hard thing.
Yeah, lifelong learning, and also learning within community. I think that a lot of people, are very black and white when it comes to this is how it's done, right, in education. But really, it's more like a tension between the two views of like you got to draw from within, but also from the community as well, right? And it's like two teams pulling the same rope, right? You got to have a healthy tension, I think, between the two things. Because I think oftentimes in society we're very black and white. Either you're a good person or you're evil. Yeah. Either something's too hot or too cold. But there's a spectrum in all this stuff, right? Like there's a number line, 0 and then positive 1 through 10, and then negative 1 through 10, right? There's a spectrum of things, and I think we have to look at that and say, well, where am I on this spectrum, right? Of views. You can't just say, oh, all public school is 100% evil, and then all homeschooling is all great necessarily, right? It's like there's a spectrum of things, and I think that there's value perhaps in both, and of course understanding that the education that's set up the way it is now, it's only it's only 100 something years old, really.
Years old, or
yeah, it's not very, compared to we humans have been living a certain way and educating our children a different way for thousands of years. And this is a very new societal experiment, and we have yet to see really how this is going to change our society, or it has, but we just aren't aware of it because we don't see, like, for thousands of years, you said there's been internships, right? People learn from their parents, people learn a skill through apprenticeship, or they just grew up on the farm and you're a farmer. And now we're moving to this society where, we send our kids off for 8 hours a day to be with these other adults. That's a really, really new concept. I don't think people really understand that it's such a brand new concept in relationship to the human history itself, across all civilizations, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also something to be aware of and to keep note of, that I think it's shifting again too. So what we've known to be the last 150, 180 years, I don't know when, but I think there's going to be a bit of a shift as well in different ways. I don't know what that's necessarily going to look like, but to remember that it's always also, I don't think things are going to be stagnant. They're going to be this way always. But what we do have so far, like you said, the community is learning from each other. And I think that has happened always from the beginning of time, as with families and communities, to even the institution of schooling, where it has its own community in that way. But I agree, it's like looking at it, and I like how you added the negative values as well. It's not just 1 to 10. There's also, -1, -2, and there's a lot more to it than we realize. It's not just good and bad, and there actually can be a blend. There can be a balance sometimes as well, and support each other too. But we have to step away from thinking it's only one way and you can't have the other way, in order to have that blend too. Which I'm not sure. I hope we're there, but we're coming closer. But there's still some things to work out in that way.
Oh, we're humans. Whenever you have more than one person around, there's politics.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. There's always politics. There's you get group people together. It's frustrating because you have all these different point of views, perspectives. Maybe their mask is different, or the way they interpret things is different. And, everyone's got their own opinion, as we can see from social media, Yeah. It's like, oh, okay. I didn't realize there's this many point of views. I did not realize that.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time, Robyn. I really appreciate the dialogue that we had on this. And if the audience has any, I don't see any questions, I believe, right? Because I haven't been paying attention to. Okay, there's some comments. Studies show that retain. So history unboxed. Studies show that students retain 9% of what they learn if they teach someone Engage, 50% involved in discussion. Yes. Okay. Cool. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, you definitely want to get kids involved in their learning. Whoa. Okay, still new to this stuff. Ooh. Oh, wow. All right. Well, I mean, that's all the questions I have, Robyn. Did you have anything else to add on, or maybe you have a question for me as a host, I guess?
Okay. So why? I know that you're a STEM educator, that you're a STEM educator as well. So what's the interest in homeschooling? What did you see that has interested you in this learning outside of the classroom?
So during the pandemic, I never met a happy parent in regards to education. And so that got me curious. And also, my wife was actually homeschooled. She was one of 4 daughters. And we never really talked about it as much because my wife's mom actually passed away when she was 18. So it was one of those things that we never really talked about a lot until recently. Like, we've been married for a couple years now. And so, she's still moving through, especially where we just had our own daughter. So that brought up a lot of, memories and emotions of like, oh yeah, my mom and this and that. So that was one of the starting points, but also just seeing a lot of my friends started homeschooling. So I got very curious about it. And the more I looked into it, especially with my journey, right, of, teaching and really going from this model of like, I'm a sage on a stage. I got to know all the answers. I got to know everything. To I'm more of a guy on the side now, especially with STEM. Well, that's one of the main reasons I'm still in this system is like I love teaching STEM. And I see a lot of the principles in STEM applying to real life. What does failure mean, right? We talk about you have this idea of like what success looks like, right? But there's always room for improvement, right? There's always room for a different perspective. And so that's my kind of journey, and seeing that, a lot of parents really want STEM but they don't understand. It comes down to their story of like, oh, what does STEM look like? Am I qualified to teach it? Am I this or that? I'm like, I was a psychology major and I got thrown into a STEM class for high school students who were doing competitions. And yeah, that was quite a journey to relearn like, okay, I don't know everything, but I'm just going to sit here and create a learning experience, if you will, for students to learn, right? I realize it's not about me. I don't need to have all the answers because they're the ones building something to enter these competitions, right? It's much more important that they understand how to troubleshoot, how to fix things on the fly, and all those things. So that's really where my perspective, and I feel like it's been a journey of like, this is where I started from, and I'm evolving in my teaching path, and understanding that, like there's so much more out there than just what I've been taught in my teaching school, right? There's just so much more out there, and I'm definitely, I'm definitely going to homeschool my kids, and I don't know how this will transition for my career, becoming entrepreneur perhaps and whatnot. But I do know that, I'm on this journey of learning. And so that's why, my podcast is called Hard Education, because it's so much bigger than just this dichotomy of like public school, homeschooling. And then there's, like you said, there's a spectrum, right, of things. And I feel like if I really had to say it, public school and homeschooling, I think are 2 wings of the same bird. Okay. I think that's how I see it. It's like, it's 2, it's the wings of the same bird. We just don't realize it because they're all flapping right on the opposite side. We don't realize that, it's all about education in the day. It's about parenting. It's about what does it mean? What is a hard education, right? And I think that if you just throw out everything on one side and say everything's evil, like, nope, we don't accept anything from you, then I think you kind of missed the point. There's a lot of things that we can draw from the current school system that is helpful, right? But there's also a lot of things that homeschooling offers, which I feel like is more of a, how should I say this? Is a more, what's the good word? I guess ancient pathway of learning, right? That humans have used for thousands of years. Homeschooling is more akin to what was education like in the early American days and across societies, that's really what it looks like more. And I think both sides have something to offer if we're willing to just, again, listen, right, without judging the information that's coming into us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's me. That's a great question.
Thanks, Rock. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for me to know as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on live, and thank you for all people who joined us. We didn't really have time. I apologize to everyone who was maybe commenting. Oh, thank you both. Oh, thank you to Mirha de la Sema. I'm sorry, I butcher names all the time, especially. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Miss Classical 20. No one should say public education is best quality. No one should say homeschooling or unschooling is the best. They all have their place. Two wings of the same bird. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there were some great comments. I saw that it came through. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Robyn. It was a pleasure.
It was wonderful. I appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone else.